Welcome to Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey, the podcast where we dive into the wild, rewarding, and sometimes unpredictable world of becoming a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, a current third-year veterinary student at the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Whether you're an aspiring vet, a vet student, or just passionate about animals, this is your backstage pass into becoming a DVM. From classroom to clinic, we're sharing the insights, tips, and real-life experiences to help you thrive on your journey to becoming a vet. So scrub in, and let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Scrubbed In. I'm your host, Grace Gaynor, and today I'm delighted to welcome my friend, Allie Kaloss, to the podcast today. Allie is a third-year veterinary student attending the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. Allie, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Amazing. Today we are going to discuss study strategies that will help you succeed in veterinary school. So whether you're an incoming first year or a second year or even a third year, we're going to talk about all the study strategies that we think are very important that will help you succeed in veterinary school. But first, let's get to know Allie. So Allie, tell us about your journey to veterinary school.
Absolutely. So I grew up in Maryland, actually not that far from Grace, and I grew up around horses starting at the age of 4 or 5, fell in love with animals, and slowly kept along with that. I was in 4-H and FFA in high school, and that really solidified my desire to go into veterinary school and the field of veterinary medicine. I participated in a lot of competitions around veterinary medicine, dairy cattle judging, things like that. And I took that love straight into undergrad, where I majored in animal science at the University of Maryland.
Go Terps.
Exactly. So while I was there, I was really lucky, and I joined an honors college, the Integrated Life Sciences Honors College, and they required 240 hours of research. And at the time, I was like, you know what? Research is kind of boring. I don't think this is going to be for me. I don't know that I want to do this. So as any college student does, I scrolled through a bunch of ads and found the one paying job.
Nice.
And it happened to be doing equine nutrition work with Dr. Amy Burke, who was just absolutely lovely. And that was where I really started to discover that my passion for veterinary medicine didn't just end up in the clinics, but it was also behind the scenes on creating diagnostics and creating other things for the animals, and that I really very much enjoyed research. So while I was with Amy Burke's lab, we were studying grasses. So we were out in fields looking at golf course grass, which is turf grass, and seeing, can this be used for insulin resistant and metabolic disease horses? And is this an alternative for them being on a dry lot? And I had a lot of fun. I learned so much in that experience, and it actually made me question, do I just want to go do a DVM, or do I want to pursue a career that's in research? And I remember really struggling with that back and forth, and which one was more important to me? Is it vet school or grad school? And it wasn't until I was super lucky, our honors college head at the time used to do these Tuesday lunches where he would sit in the dining hall and you could just come in and talk about whatever was on your mind, whether it was school, home, family, whatever. And I was really, really pondering my decisions for what I wanted to do after undergrad. I went to him and kind of laid out my whole story and asked for his advice, and he looked at me and he's like, you do realize you don't have to pick. There are these things called DVM PhD programs, and you can do both, and you can pursue these passions equally after undergrad. And suddenly, it clicked in my brain. I started looking into these programs, asking questions, and the rest was history. I applied for 4 different school dual degree programs. I got in at Virginia, Maryland, and began my journey in 2019, and it's been amazing ever since.
Wow, that is such a cool story. I love how that person was able to kind of guide you in where you wanted to go. I feel like so many of us can look back on our journey and remember these select few mentors that really helped shape us and shape our journey. And I love that that person did that for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you share what motivated you to pursue a PhD and tell us a bit about the focus of your research?
Absolutely. So the experience that I had in Dr. Amy Burke's lab, where I got to see problems that were then followed through and investigated all the way to the end, and how you could publish and apply for grants with that, those solutions, really inspired my path towards research. I was very lucky that when I started my dual degree program, I got placed with a wonderful mentor. So I did my PhD with Dr. Michelle Theus, and that project was focused on vascular biology in mouse models of ischemic stroke. So when you have a blood clot that's in your brain, you are depriving certain areas of your brain from oxygen and nutrients. And luckily, we have these specialized set of blood vessels that serve as a safety net for us. And they're going to determine how well we do after a stroke. So the number of these vessels that we have and their ability to remodel are the most important thing. And the number that you have are set at birth. So your safety net is determined before you're ever born. And then once you have the stroke, once a blood clot lodges in your brain, they can then grow and remodel. And the larger they get, the more blood they bring, and the better you do. So my PhD focused on, can we use different gene knockouts, different drugs, and then we also looked into focused ultrasound to modulate and help these collateral blood vessels grow even larger to, in our case, have the mice perform better after stroke. And this was the kind of beginning of the joining of veterinary medicine and research, where I could see how we can apply basic cell biology and basic science to live animals and help them in their path.
Yeah, that's so cool. Did your research find that the ultrasound was able to help the mice after stroke? Did it help grow those vessels?
So the low intensity focused ultrasound ended up not working the way we thought it would. So we were really hoping that it would increase the size of these, they're called peel collaterals, the safety net, and help reduce the amount of tissue that was damaged. And interestingly enough, it did reduce the amount of tissue that was damaged, but it actually did it through a different mechanism of much smaller blood vessels and triggering the growth of capillaries instead. But we did find that when we modulated, the main two proteins that I looked at were FA4 and Tie2. And if we either turned down FA4's expression or if we gave peptides to increase activation of Tie2, we were able to expand these blood vessels pretty dramatically.
Yeah.
So
wow.
It was a lot of fun.
So interesting. So fascinating. I think it's so cool you were able to do that research through your PhD. Do you feel your PhD has given you any unique advantages or perspectives as a veterinary student?
I think that's such a great question. I think there are two major benefits that I think my PhD has provided me in veterinary school, and neither of them are necessarily a knowledge base. So you focus very much on one topic, and it's not that me knowing a lot about a specific blood vessel changed my way of going throughout veterinary school.
Right.
But what it did provide me was a deeper understanding of the techniques we use in diagnostics. So PCRs, ELISAs, I performed those during my grad school education. So it was much easier for me to understand what was going on and why we would use them when we came to vet school. So it did provide me that bit of knowledge, but where it benefited me the most was, in my opinion, my problem-solving mindset. So my dad always tells me the re is in front of the search for a reason, because so much of your PhD is troubleshooting when things go wrong. So there are a lot of times where your experiment is either not working or you need to design new methods. And in order to do these things, you have to really deeply understand your system and the process that you're going through. So if you are running a PCR, you need to know what each step is doing in order to be able to troubleshoot when things go wrong. And that is really similar to veterinary school. So understanding the anatomy and the physiology of all those different systems allows you to then, when an animal comes in sick and it has certain symptoms, signs, you can take those and relate them back to the different organ systems and the different anatomy and allow you to logic through so much of what you encounter. And that's where I think my PhD really shines, is it has helped me build those stories in my head and logic through many of the problems that we face.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I love that you just have talked about your story and receiving a PhD and achieving that huge accomplishment. And I think it's important for people to understand that that is an avenue that you can pursue if you want to do research after veterinary school. I definitely think it takes some reflection on whether or not, you need a PhD to do whatever work you're interested in doing. So I think it's cool that you had those really informative experiences in undergrad with research that really helped you hone in on the fact that you wanted to do research and you did need to pursue getting a PhD. And I also think it's a good option for people who, maybe not necessarily a PhD, but pursuing a master's to help kind of sharpen their resume before they apply it to veterinary school and make them more competitive as well.
Absolutely.
So Allie, is not only one of the most insightful students I know, but she is an amazing peer tutor, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to have her on the podcast today. She's incredibly smart. She's super good at tutoring others. I personally have benefited from her tutoring, so I know that she is an excellent person to talk with us today about study strategies in veterinary school. So, Allie, can you walk us through some of the study strategies that have helped you succeed in veterinary school so far?
Absolutely. So I will admit, for me, after coming back from grad school and entering veterinary school, it was definitely a huge culture shock. The last tail end of my PhD, I did not have any classroom learning. I was doing 100% research. So going back and sitting, 8 hours a day in a classroom was not what I was used to. And it required a lot of reflection and sort of recalculating how I was studying. And I remember sitting in Admitted Students Day and asking previous veterinary students, how are you studying? How should I succeed? And they would tell me over and over again, no matter who I asked, oh, there's no one-size-fits-all study plan. You'll figure it out. It'll all be okay. Don't stress. And to me, I'm like, well, I'm going to stress anyway. But they were not wrong. There is not one-size-fits-all study plan. And you really have to, in veterinary school, be adaptable. So in undergrad, I wrote a study guide for every single one of my lectures. I would have my 50-minute lecture, and I would come home and I would summarize it all in a page or two with pretty colors and make it enjoyable to study, and that's just not feasible for me, at least in veterinary school. We have 8 lectures a day. I don't have the time or the energy to come home and make study guides for that many lectures in a row. So I have adapted my system. When I started out first year in veterinary school, I began on Quizlet, as many do, making my flashcards, and I had a great friend, Amelia, who recommended I look into Anki, and that's a system that uses AI and works on spaced retention in order for you to learn the material, and I am a huge believer in active recall and spaced retention, so I have used Anki ever since, and I would say that's the core of my study technique, is using flashcards. However, I definitely adapt a little bit in every class. So while that is the center of what I do, each class requires fine-tuning. So when we first started parasitology, bacteriology, things like that, I made a lot of these sort of flow chart looking things where I split it into family, genus, species, things like that, because sometimes it's easier to study smarter and not harder. So if 5 bacteria share the same 10 characteristics, don't learn them for all 5. Learn them as a family, and that all of them share that. So I definitely try to adapt that way. Some people I know in our class make charts, and that works really well for them. I have not found the same success with that in my own study habits. The other thing too is I don't always study the same every day, because some days I am just not in the mood to sit on my couch and do flashcards. So that might be, instead of sitting on the couch and doing flashcards, second year I purchased a walking pad and a standing desk, and now I can sort of aggressively walk and do my flashcards at the same time. Or if I'm having trouble paying attention, I'll sit and I'll write them on a whiteboard, and that just helps keep me actively engaged in my studying. So I'd say adapt to the class and also to your mood every day. Those are kind of 2 really big things. My last sort of 2 pieces of studying that sort of make or break how well I do on an exam are talking to myself and talking in group settings. So you should not be afraid in the quiet and comfort of your own home of acting like a crazy person and talking to yourself. Or my dog. I think my dog knows more than I do about vet school at this point. So I will take any topic and I will start building the pieces together. So my flashcard will have some sort of question on the front, and I will talk through everything I can think of about that subject. And I will also try to build in why that makes sense. So if we're talking about, changes in the heart, I might go back to some of those blood pressure and blood flow equations and try to piece together why this makes sense in those settings and build the story. Because for me, I love learning off of stories. And if I can create anything into a story, I can then remember it. So don't be afraid to talk to yourself, because hearing it back definitely helps, putting it into that story and listening helps you retain that information. And the second piece is studying with friends and quizzing each other and being able to explain topics. It not only is excellent way of reminding yourself that you understand the material by being able to explain it, but also then when you're struggling, you have somebody else to lean on and support you. So I would say, in a nutshell, that is how I study.
Wow, so many great pieces of advice in what you just talked about. First, I have to say, I have truly benefited from our group studying. Allie and I and a couple other people have formed a really strong study group, and I definitely recommend, if you're an incoming first year, find a good study group. And this can be really difficult. I know that for me personally in undergrad, I could never find a good study group. And so I, for the most part, studied on my own. But now that I'm in veterinary school, I find that I rely heavily on our study group. And I think it is important and super helpful, even if you can just find one other person to talk to about the topics and go over things that you may not understand. That will help you tremendously, because like Allie mentioned, there are definitely going to be days where you do not want to be studying. And sometimes having that accountability is all you need to keep you going on the right track.
Without a doubt.
But I also love how you mentioned that I think that every class is different and we really have to adapt to that. And it's so true. I like that you have a core method that you use, but you tweak it a little bit for every class, every subject. And I think that comes from a place of you understanding how you learn and then being able to adapt to the topic. So definitely, if you're out there and you're coming into veterinary school or you're currently in vet school, remember that it's okay to adapt your study methods to whatever class you're facing. And don't be afraid to mix it up if necessary. So, really great piece of advice. What advice would you give to students who are just beginning their journey in veterinary school and are navigating this level of study for the first time?
I would start and say my biggest piece of advice is don't panic when what you did in undergrad does not work for you in vet school.
Period.
So, as we've already talked about, what I did in undergrad absolutely did not work for me in vet school.
Yes.
And vet school is an entirely different beast. You cannot just rote memorize your way to success. You really have to focus on understanding and connecting across different systems. I know that sounds cliche, but it is cliche for a reason. Like, understanding is just so important.
Yeah.
So even though if you don't know your learning style day one, try your different approaches early on.
Yes.
You know, draw things out, speak them out loud, do your flashcards, figure out whether you do better in a group or by yourself, and spend some time settling into veterinary school. I know Virginia, Maryland does a great job. They start us off with a class called the Normal Animal. And it's meant to be a level the playing field kind of class where they go over all the basics and you have a little bit of wiggle room. It's definitely not an easy class, but it is probably not the hardest class you're going to face at vet school. So use that time to settle in and figure out what you're doing.
Yeah.
And remember, no matter what, you only have control of the input, not the output. So you have control over how you're studying and what you're studying. You don't have control over what ends up on the exam and how they ask you those questions. So your main goal is to go into an exam saying, I have tried my best and I have prepared to the best ability that I know how. And the score that comes is the score that comes, because you cannot control what ends up on that exam. You can only control what you can do in your life. And that is a major thing to focus on, that you are not a bad person no matter what your exam score is, and it does not change whether or not you're going to be a good vet at the end of the day, as long as your focus is on understanding. And building off of that, I would say, you know, just as much as you can only control the input, you need to frame your life in a way that allows you to succeed.
Yeah.
Eat healthy. Sleep, absolutely sleep. You cannot put that information into your memories without good sleep. I am a huge believer that you need that 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep in order to function, and make that a priority and plan it into your day. Plan your study time, plan your sleeping time, and every once in a while put nothing on your calendar so that you can tell people, sorry, I'm busy. It just happens to be that you're busy doing nothing. So.
Wow. Allie, I think I need you to give me this pep talk before every single exam from now on. Allie and I sit next to each other in class, and we sit next to each other for exams, and I'm realizing that, like, I kind of need this pep talk every single time. But you mentioned some really great points, and it's funny because I actually had an incoming first-year veterinary student who's coming to the Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine ask me, he sent me an email, and he said, what is your biggest piece of advice? And I literally said, do not slack off in the normal animal. This is your time. And it may not be, you know, our veterinary school, but even if you're going to another vet school, which maybe starts out with some easier courses, and of course that varies by college, But if you can, take that time to really figure out what your study strategies are going to be. Play around with it. If you have wiggle room, definitely experiment and see what works for you. So I definitely think that's a great piece of advice. And also, definitely make sure to just do your best. And at the end of the day, let the chips fall where they may, right? So I love that advice. And I think it's something that we need to hear because our grades definitely don't define us, even though it is really hard when you're trying to do well and you study super hard and the exam grade just doesn't show you what you think you deserve. But at the end of the day, all we can do is our best. So don't forget to tell me that for the next exam.
For every exam from
I need
now on.
Yeah, I need to hear it. My next question is, from your experience as a tutor, what are some common challenges or mistakes you see among veterinary students who seek academic support? And I want to clarify for anyone listening, many of us use tutoring not because we're struggling, but just to deepen our understanding. So I'm asking this question not from a place of trying to shame someone for seeking academic support, but just from, your experience as a tutor, what are common mistakes you see students making that cause them to want to get a little bit of additional help?
Yeah, I want to completely reiterate that fact. And before I answer the question, talk a little bit about tutoring. So I totally agree. Tutoring is not a dirty word. Yeah. It's not something you should be ashamed of. And you are not any less of a student or any less of a person for being involved in tutoring.
Yes.
I know for me as the tutor, it is one of the most rewarding things that I do in veterinary school. And I hope that I only give a small piece back to what the students that I tutor give to me because it has been such a growth experience. And it is not only a way for you to gain more understanding of material, it's an amazing way for you to build connections with your classmates, ask some questions, also see how other students in your class are feeling about the material and help build a camaraderie, realizing you're not the only one that might be struggling understanding a topic, and hear what's working for them or what's not working for them studying, and just provide a little bit of perspective to your life. So I think it is such a great tool, and that basically everyone can benefit in some shape, way, or form from going to some level of tutoring. And if not, it's at least just a built-in hour or two a week of you studying. Yeah. It is a forced studying activity. And I know for me, at a lot of the sessions that I lead, I really love to add in some case-based material. So one, you can feel like a veterinarian from the get-go and start diagnosing and understanding some problems. And also, that's going to help prepare you for things like integrative sessions that we have, case-based examples on exams, and just your future in clinics. Yeah. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with going to tutoring, and I think it is such an amazing tool that we are lucky to have available to us.
Yes.
So back to your question, some mistakes or some things that people do differently from me when they start out vet school. So one thing is we've talked about using your initial classes to find your study methods and what works for you. One of the biggest mistakes, though, is you can't just keep 180ing from study method to study method to study method.
Yeah.
So you pick something, and if you think it's not working out for you, spend some time reflecting on why it is not working.
Yes.
So maybe, I'm a flashcard girly. I live and die by my flashcards. If you try them and you say, hey, I thought it was going to be great, but it's not getting me all the way there. It's only getting me 50% of the way. Yeah. Then don't just throw flashcards by the road. Add something else or adapt the way that you're doing it. So don't throw the baby out with bathwater. Reflect back, see what's working, and only change what is not working. And that allows you to take small steps towards doing better rather than giant leaps where the new thing you leap to might only get you 40% of this way there, and now you feel even worse off than you were before. So I'd say no matter what, do not make dramatic changes over and over and over to your study habits. Incremental changes are the best.
Yes.
And then my other piece of advice is do not passive study. So it is so tempting to throw on some Netflix in the background or to just read through your lecture notes, highlight some things, re-listen to the lectures on the lecture capture, but not actually engage in the material.
Yep.
And that could mean you spending 20 hours studying and doing what you could have done in 3 if you were actively engaged. And that's going to eat into your sleep schedule, into your social life, and your ability to work out, get active, do things like that. So make sure you are actively engaging with the material. If you can't answer practice questions or you can't explain it back to a friend, you probably don't understand that material and you need to spend a little more time engaging with it or seek out help so that someone else can help you understand that material. And then I would leave it with one last piece of advice, other than don't dramatically change your study habits and make sure you are actively engaging. My last piece of advice is don't compare yourself to others, because you only see a small portion of their day. So it's so easy to say, I'm studying so much more than XYZ person and I'm still doing worse than they are on these exams. So I'm a big proponent. I try my best not to tell anyone my exam scores. That is between me, myself, and I. And nobody else needs to know.
Yep.
And I only compare myself to how I was doing last week, last exam, last year. I don't need to compare myself to every other person in vet school, because some people are going to study way less than you are and do way better, and other people are going to study way more than you and do worse. So you can only compare yourself to what you do, and your main goal should be to do the best that you can and be the best that you are.
Wow. Absolute fire, Allie. Yes to all of the above pieces of advice. I definitely want to reiterate, I completely agree that if you have a study strategy that you think is getting you most of the way there, don't be so hard on yourself. Make small changes. Obviously, we keep saying that you need to figure out what works for you, but I completely agree. Making a huge change in between exams in a class is definitely not going to help you. It's going to probably throw you for a loop. You're probably going to do worse. So I definitely agree. Maybe instead of, taking something away, adding something, maybe doing group study if you've only been doing flashcards, or starting some flashcards if you've only been doing group study. I think that's really great advice. And I think that this also is another reason why people need to go to exam reviews. If your school has some type of exam review, you need to go to the exam reviews to understand why you're getting questions wrong. I know that I've mentioned this before in other episodes, but I have often gone to exam reviews and realized that the question really threw me off, the way it was worded, or maybe some of the answer choices. And I realized that I did know the material, I just ended up choosing the wrong answer. And while that is really frustrating, there's no reason for me to double down and completely change all my study habits just because I kind of misunderstood the question or didn't really understand what they were asking, but I did know the material. So definitely go to your exam reviews.
I cannot agree with that more. They are one of my least favorite things because I hate learning that I am wrong, but I think they are one of the most important things in veterinary school. These topics are going to come back up again, and sometimes what you think you got wrong is not actually what you got wrong.
So true!
And you need to know that you didn't know that topic as well as you thought you did, so when that final comes in, when that case comes in on clinics, you've figured it out, you understand where you went wrong, and you've adjusted accordingly. So yes, I 100% agree with that point.
Yeah. And definitely, it's so hard, but you have to try not to compare yourself to others. And it's something I struggle with on a daily basis. I think we all struggle with it because a lot of us, maybe it takes us more time to pick up material or topics, and so it can be hard to see other people really succeeding. But I stand behind your point. I also don't discuss my grades with anyone, and I think that that does help me kind of try to stay in my own lane and really just focus on, like you said, improving each week on each exam and really trying to focus on understanding the material above all else. So, great pieces of advice. Thank you for sharing that with us today. I have one more question kind of focused on study strategies. If a student enters vet school with what they think are pretty solid study habits, but they still find themselves struggling with the material, what would you suggest they try to do next? We've kind of talked about this already, but anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah. So first off, I would say you are not alone. Even the smartest people that are in veterinary school, they are going to struggle understanding some of that material.
Yeah.
And some of the things I didn't understand or that I thought I understood at the time, I later found out I didn't. And being a tutor has actually taught me so much and has made me engage with the material even more deeply and understand it so much better than I did the first time around. And my piece of advice is if you think you have great study strategies, but you don't think you're performing at the level that you want to, two things. One, just because it's hard, like veterinary school, does not mean that it's not worth doing. And it doesn't mean that you're not good at it. So don't let the fact that your grades are not where you would like them to be discourage you from studying, discouraging you from being engaged in vet school. And just because you don't have the grades you want, it doesn't mean that you aren't going to be a great veterinarian. one day, or that you shouldn't be in vet school. And this goes for undergrad, anything else in life. So my first piece of advice is really just don't beat yourself up too much. And my second piece of advice is to find your people. So as Grace has mentioned, we group study all the time. One of the things I love about her is we will get out of a hard class and we go for our little walk around the vet school just to stretch our legs. And she asks me, what are the 3 things we took from this lecture? And immediately having to think back and be like, wait, what actually did I learn in the last hour is so helpful. So have those people in your corner. Have the people that keep you accountable. I know that it is sometimes so hard to do things for myself and so easy to do things for others. So we have a standing date where every Sunday our group gets together to study, and I know that I need to be prepared for that study session. So even when it's hard for me to find my own motivation to study for myself, I can say I need to study to be prepared to help other people and to make sure that I am, holding up my end of the bargain when we start this study session on Sunday. So really find your people that are going to keep you motivated. And if you start studying with a group and you find that it is not working, there is nothing wrong with saying that you can't study with them anymore on a regular basis. So make sure that the people that you are studying with, it is a productive study session. You can have friends and they can be amazing friends and you might not want to study with them, and that is totally okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. So don't beat yourself up and find your people.
Wow. Such good advice. I'm literally being blown away by this advice right now because I just couldn't have said it better myself. I completely agree. And I know Allie is saying this specifically to me because I have a lot of people that I just cannot study with in our class. And it's nothing personal. It's just that the way I think, the way I communicate, and the way I learn doesn't really line up with their method of learning and communicating. And so I definitely think it's important to, obviously, I'm cordial with everyone and I am dear friends with many people in our class, but that does not mean I go around and study with all of them. We have our study group, and while we try to be welcoming to people, we have a very strong group. So it's kind of, that is our method of studying, and we really hold dear to that and hold true to that, and we come in on Sundays and we study together. So definitely important for you to find those people. So great pieces of advice. Thank you, Allie, for that. But now let's pivot to clinics for a moment. Can you give us a quick overview of your first 3 clinical rotations and what those experiences were like for you?
Absolutely. So I started off my summer. We're allowed 1 split block in all 17 of our clinics, and I used it block 1. So I started off clinics with a week down at NC State with their anatomical path department, and it was such a great experience. I got to work on their necropsy floor, attend their biopsy histology rounds, and see what it's like to live the life of a resident at NC State. And it was a truly great experience, and I enjoyed it immensely for that week. And then for the other 2 weeks of my block 1, I spent it at a private equine practice. Had a lot of fun seeing what a field veterinarian looks like in the field of equine medicine. Block 2, I went to Charles River's laboratory. I worked at a non-human primate quarantine facility and got to understand what it looks like to have non-human primates in research, what it looks like to care for them, ensure that they are having the best life that they can in these settings, and also the regulations behind animal use in research. I'm very passionate about research, and I think it's really important to understand the rules and the regulations that govern our ability to do this research. So that was my second block. And then my third block is at the Equine Medical Center in Leesburg, Virginia, run by the Virginia Maryland College of Vet Med. I've been really grateful to share this rotation with Grace, and we've had a lot of fun understanding what a referral center looks like in equine medicine and how they handle emergencies and cases compared to, private practice field service. So it has been a real joy. I've enjoyed clinics a lot so far, and I'm looking forward to my next 2 where I get to spend some time in community practice for small animals and emergency critical care for small animals as well.
Yeah, we have had quite a time here in Leesburg, Virginia over the past 3 weeks. Our 3 weeks of this rotation are coming to a close, and we have definitely learned a lot, had a lot of interesting and very informative experiences. So what is the coolest or most memorable thing you've done or seen so far in your clinical experiences?
Yes, so we've only been in clinics for a couple of weeks. I would say I've seen a lot of cool cases. As you know, I'm really passionate about the field of anatomical pathology. I got into it while I was a vet student or a graduate student while I had an amazing postdoc introduced me to his wife that happened to be an anatomical pathology resident at the time, and fell in love with the career. So I was super pumped to be able to spend a week doing what I love at NC State.
Yeah.
And we saw 2 amazing cases. There was a teratoma in a chicken that just histologically looked so beautiful, and carcinomatosis in horses that I had never seen before. There was one case of carcinomatosis that was absolutely insane to look at. And then on this rotation here at the Equine Medical Center, it was so cool. I met a pony that had a bladder stone, and I got to see it from diagnosis through surgery, through recovery, and that was such a wonderful experience to see how we could take a horse and resolve their clinical signs and work them through the problem.
What is a teratoma for people who don't know?
It is a germ cell tumor where you have at least 2 different germ cell origin mutations. So
that's so
it was
cool.
Massive in this
chicken. Poor chicken. That's so cool. Yeah, it sounds like you've had some really cool experiences so far, and hopefully that continues through the end of the summer. So finally, I've got one more question for you. As we hit the halfway mark of our clinical year, what's one piece of advice you'd share with our classmates who might be tuning in?
I would say to them, no matter what, keep showing up with curiosity. In clinics, even when you're tired, you're exhausted, even if the case is something you've already seen before, treat it like a new opportunity to learn and a new opportunity to sharpen your skills. And don't underestimate how much you have learned. It doesn't always feel like you're making huge progress, but when one day you look back and you realize, I just did the soap, I just worked through this whole treatment plan, I just worked through the diagnosis of this patient. I couldn't even imagine doing that 2, 3, 4 years ago. And just reflect on how far you come. Like this, being on clinics, helping animals, working on a team of clinicians, this is what we dreamed of doing, and this is where we dreamed of being, and it's so easy to get caught up in the grind and forget that. So every once in a while, take a second to recognize how far you've come, and remember that even on the hardest days, you are living your dreams, and these are the goals that you hoped you'd one day have. So no matter what, don't take it for granted. Celebrate the small wins that you have as you go through clinics, and keep the belief that growth is happening even if you don't see it every day and even when it feels slow. So trust the process. Always ask for feedback and be kind to yourself along the way.
Yeah, and be kind to each other.
And be kind to each other, absolutely.
Yeah, I couldn't have made it through this rotation without Allie, and definitely trying to take it for granted, these experiences, but great advice.
Wouldn't have wanted to do it with anybody else.
Yeah. So sad that it's coming to a close, but ready to move on to the next thing, so awesome. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Allie. I really enjoyed talking to you, learning about your experience as a tutor, and hearing you share some incredible pieces of advice that I really think will help anyone who listens in. My name is Grace Gaynor, and I just interviewed Allie Kaloss, and we are Scrubbing Out! That's a wrap for today's episode of Scrubbed In, the DVM Journey. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of our community of future vets and animal lovers. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. It helps others find the show and join the conversation. And if you have any questions or topics you'd love to hear about, feel free to leave us a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep scrubbing in, and remember, the journey to becoming a DVM is one step at a time.